This is our webinar about how we can manage contracts in SharePoint. This came about because I've spoken to numerous clients of ours, and they've been talking about sort of the challenges that they see with contract management. And we thought, well, actually, let's take those pain points and see what we could pull together. So given that, we're going to be talking about how can I create contracts, particularly in this scenario, an NDA. We'll talk about what happens when I get a contract and how can I get that through multiple steps of approval. Maybe if you're buying a new software solution, you might need to get IT to sign it off. And then after that, you might need legal to sign it off. And that's the scenario we're going to be running through here today. When contracts are approved, we're going to be talking about how we can extract data from those contracts, even though contracts may all look different. And then the final bit is we'll be looking at e-signature integration. So how can we use Adobe Sign to push documents from SharePoint to maybe a third party outside the organization for signature, and then bring that document back into SharePoint. So that's the overview. Ben, who's this best tuned for?
Yeah, no, thanks, Rupert. So, really, this is, as we said, if you're in procurement, maybe you're in operations or a legal function, or realistically, any business where you're struggling with email-driven processes, you're using email to do approvals, and then maybe things are being filed in that way. So in terms of takeaways, we're going to be looking at how we can actually use some tools to enforce compliance of things like procurement policies, such as ensuring that contracts need to be approved before they're signed off. Looking at removing that email process where we're approving by email by coming to a centralized portal to manage our contracts. And then, of course, another fairly key point around this is how do we manage contract renewals? What if those renewals have certain automatic notice period dates, after which if you miss that notice period, then you're automatically renewed for another year? So how can you preempt some of that with the tools that we're going to show you today?
Cool, Ben. I think, and just to talk about, if you see something here today that is of interest to you, you want to explore further, my name's Rupert. You can jump on our website, informationexp.com, and if you book a call with me, we can do a live demo or explore a little bit further. So coming back to today, what's going wrong? And even in a small business like ours, I sometimes see these kind of things. So the first thing is there's no oversight. People may be entering into contracts without the right sign off. Maybe I'm going to go and buy some SaaS service. Ben, in his role as CTO, he needs visibility about, does it meet our security requirements? Are we going to get our cyber essentials at risk because of that? Or have they got all the right checks and balances that we need? So that's the oversight piece. It might not just be IT, it could also be legal oversight as well. The second thing is often when you enter into contracts, maybe it's through DocuSign sent from the supplier, that final executed document sits in people's inboxes and then is only needed when something goes wrong. What happens if that person leaves? What happens if subsequent versions are signed? How do we get that? So there's no single source of the truth. And we find that contracts, different departments work different ways. And then the piece which leads on from that is lots of service contracts automatically renew because there's benefit into that. You want to keep maybe access to your antivirus software, for example, but it's good to be aware of it. And so you've got that idea of like, when is my notice period? When do I have to inform somebody if I want to maintain my relationship or maybe terminate it? And so you're not sort of chasing your tail, as it were. So how can we manage renewals? So that's some of the challenges that I think many organizations see. And Ben, I think moving on to the next slide, we talk about what does good look like. And so my role, I'm client facing, so I hear what people are talking to me about. Ben's role is to lead our technical team. I said, look, Ben, this is what people are telling me. Could we create something like that? And he said, well, sure, map it out and I'll see what I can do. So that's what we've done today. So I said, look, this is a kind of process which I think would work well for us. And the first one is, when I'm going to start working with a supplier, the first thing I want to do is issue them our NDA. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to make sure that if I share sensitive information about how our business works, that they're compelled not to tell anyone else about it. So we want to issue that NDA on our paper. And to make life easy, I want to be able to send that for e-signature. So I want that signed. And if I can manage that in one central place, that would be great. And naturally, as we're SharePoint consultancy, that central place would be SharePoint. So that builds that. So at that point, we've now got this confidentiality in place. The next piece is suppliers are going to send us a contract. I'm going to review it, at which point I probably want to bring other parties in to say, look, are you happy if we progress with this contract? So an approval process. I said even better, a multi-step approval process where maybe step 1 is IT, yeah, it's fine, you can have this, and maybe step 2 is legal, yes, I don't see any issues with this. Things like maybe like data residency, for example. So we've got a contract, it's been approved. What can we do with it next? Well, there's some probably key information in that contract which is really important to us. Things like, as Ben touched on earlier, renewal dates. So how can we pull that kind of renewal date out? When do I need to act on that? So that sounds a great example of how we can use AI to pull key information out of documents which to the human eye look very different, but contain the same information. And then that drives the final piece, which is how can I get a view of my contracts where I can see what's coming up next month, for example, what do I need to worry about? Because it's a notice period I'm worried about, not the actual renewal date. That's my first trigger for review. So that's what I set Ben the task to see if we can put something together. And I think you've done pretty well, Ben. So should we dive into it?
Well, I think before we do that, it's probably just worth thinking, why is SharePoint such a good platform to do this, Rupert, would you say?
Yeah.
Or if you're happy for me to take on that, I would say so. I think the first point is that what we tend to find is, a lot of organizations have already invested in Microsoft 365. Generally it might be because they needed it for email and they were encouraged to do so by Microsoft. And as such, it's a sunk cost investment. You're already using SharePoint, or you certainly already have licenses for it if you're using Microsoft 365. It has inbuilt security, so it is security aware. You can organize areas, you can control who's got access to what, and all of it is tied into your existing Entra ID or Active Directory permissions and the user logons that people have. But on top of that, of course, it's got search, it's got versioning capabilities. And for those organizations that are using SharePoint already, it's a familiar interface. People are moving to SharePoint. There's a lot of people that have already migrated from using file shares, so it's quite familiar. You're not having to go to a separate system to manage contracts. It's basically being brought into the place where you're working. As we did mention, it is secure. It's built on top of Microsoft's secure platform, and also if you want to ensure that only your internal users have got access to it, but you do want to enable some collaboration with those external partners, then you can do so using those established security protocols. And then the final point, and we'll see a little bit of that today, is that it's configurable. So it's configurable. We can build integrations using things like Power Automate to extend out functionality such as that, or you can even start to build out some slightly more custom components, as we will see a little bit later today. So it gives you this good platform where you can build some enhancements to it, but without the need to invest in or build an entire system to manage it using the things that you already have.
I think I might just touch on that secure point, Ben, which is often you speak to people saying, look, I'm thinking, do I buy a SaaS solution to solve this problem, or can I do something further with SharePoint? The other advantage SharePoint brings is your IT team will have already defined the security boundaries, will have configured security, you'll have groups of people. So you're building on top of what's already been validated and proven. So you haven't got to take another platform through that audit process to say, does it meet all our security requirements? So often when we get those forms, it's really like not applicable, not applicable, not applicable, because you've done that work already. It's another win.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think very quickly, before we go into the demo, Rupert, tell me the difference. We've got different types of contracts. What are we going to focus on today?
Yeah, so as a company, we issue contracts in our sales capacity. So when we're doing SharePoint consultancy projects, we will issue a contract for a workshop, for example. And the common thing about that is they're typically all coming from sales team. They're tightly defined. They're all following the same format. And yes, we are going to use these signatures and that kind of thing, but it's quite a tight, robust process, which can be controlled. I think the suppliers bit is a little bit more interesting because you've often got a broad set of people across the organization who are maybe purchasing or trying to purchase on behalf of the organization. So that makes it a bit more interesting. And the other thing which makes it more interesting is the fact that the contracts coming in are all going to be slightly different. Everyone's got even if you're buying the same kind of thing, every contract is slightly different, even though it's got that key data in. So really to put the focus on suppliers here, but there's certainly takeaways from you if you are more on the sales side.
Fantastic. So I think why don't we go over to the demo and take a look at some of this stuff.
Perfect.
So first thing to highlight, this is not a webinar about intranets. We've done a webinar on intranets more recently, so you can go and check this out. But the point that we're just making with this is, you know, our SharePoint intranet is our entry point to all of the other work that we do. So one of the things that we're going to be working on today then is around managing contracts, and that's going to live within the context of our workspaces hub. Again, if you saw our webinar on how to structure SharePoint, you'll understand how we differentiate between intranet publishing and workspaces. So we'll jump over to the workspace hub. We can see we've kind of organized this in terms of the different areas. It doesn't have to be aligned to given departments, but the thing we're going to focus on is within operations, the contracts area. So why don't you just take us into that, Rupert?
Okay.
Fantastic. So the first thing we're going to do, so what we're highlighting is we want to start working with a new supplier, and we want to basically issue a NDA or confidentiality agreement to that supplier. Now, before we do that, we want to go and create a working space within our effectively a folder within our contracts area to do that. So why don't you just start with that, Rupert? And in fact, we're not specifically using folders here. We're using something called document sets, which are a really great way of organizing collections of documents, but also allowing you to share metadata between them and have that metadata inherit. So yeah, if you just go and enter in the name of the company, perfect. And then what we can see, just to sort of demonstrate some of the capability of A, extensibility, but also being able to pull out information that can go into our documents that we'll generate shortly, is we want to get the legal name for this organization, its jurisdiction, etc. So you will often find perhaps you have their company number, and if you're in a UK organization, then you can reach out to Companies House to get more information about them. Again, there may be other equivalent services if you're in another country such as the US. So we're going to kick off our first Power Automate here to get the information about that company from Companies House. And we're calling the lookup company details. Rupert's got the company number. And we're going to go and paste that in and go and grab the information. So this can be quite useful because what you might find is you're working with an organization, but actually the name you know them by is their trading name. So this will be able to give you their legal name, which is going to be more useful in that legal context. So Rupert's kicked that off. That's actually come through straight away, actually, which is very quick, which is really good. So we can see it's pulled out the legal name of this organization. It's pulled out the address. It said the jurisdiction, et cetera, and we can then start using that information to help us do our next part, which is to generate an NDA document. So Rupert, why don't you click on Power Automate again, and we're going to look at the next one in our list. So the next one is to create the confidentiality agreement or NDA. We're going to kick that off. Not too much to input here. We just need to choose what this type of service is going to be. We'll give that a minute.
I think why this is interesting is that even though we're creating one document, we've got the ability to put options in it. So although this is an NDA, you could put other information in this document if it was a different kind of document you were generating. In this case, we're looking for IT services. So, and you'll see, I think that will come up in the document then when we get a little bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this shouldn't take too long. Why don't you just click into the folder now and see if that's been created yet? Yeah, again, that's actually, these are running very quick, which is great. So what we can see here is we've requested to create a confidentiality agreement. A document has been generated for us. And if we go and have a look inside it, we'll see that it's been pre-populated with some of the information from the document set that we retrieved earlier.
I think the other thing I like here is that we've generated a file name. In this case, it's year, month. So it's done that smartly. It's taken the company name, it's taken our name, built a nice little format there. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, this is all about just reducing the amount of manual steps and manual keying that people need to do, isn't it? It's just making that a bit easier, a bit more seamless for people.
Yeah, and I think the other thing on top of that, Ben, is that a lot of people say, how can I enforce people to name their documents consistently? And look, SharePoint if you create documents from scratch yourself, SharePoint isn't great at that. But if you start people with like, here's your document and we've named it for you, now you can move on from here. I think you're probably a step closer to achieving that.
Yeah, exactly. So we can see that the document generation has pre-populated using some placeholders the information that's been pulled from the document set. If we have a little scroll further down, we can see that in the parties section. So again, it's put in the document number, it's put in the registered addresses, the jurisdiction, etc. And then if we scroll a bit further down, we can see where we've pulled out the purpose based on that drop down. So the permitted purpose in this case has been populated based on what we entered. And again, it's just through some simple if statements that we can put into our document to basically highlight what kind of information we're going to pull through based on what was entered. I think it's just worth having a look at the end of this document a minute.
Okay.
So yeah, so this is looking a bit odd, isn't it? There's quite a lot going on here. The point about this is that when we go and start integrating with our e-signature tool, what you may have to do at the moment is whenever you send something for signature, you've got to drag and drop the signature fields. It's a bit of, it doesn't take a lot of time, but it's a bit of a process to go and move the fields onto the document so they can then be signed. So most of these tools, such as Adobe Sign and DocuSign, will allow you to put in naming conventions that indicate what that field should be doing. So we've used the syntax that Adobe Sign requires to identify what's the signature block, what's the name block, what's the title, etc., etc. So we've just built that into our template. So when the document gets generated, it's pulling that through, and we'll see how that gets used shortly.
And the other thing, Ben, that you're avoiding is if you're doing it yourself, it's the option to bring in errors. So you might just put first name rather than full name. So we're avoiding that problem as well, where you may be dragging the wrong field across from the DocuSign toolbar.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's another problem solved. Okay, I'm going to close that. And we're going to send this, is that right?
Yeah, perfect. So we've got one more that we're going to do. And again, just for the webinar, we have chosen to sequentially do these in this way. A lot of this could be done automatically. It's just it makes it a bit easier in the webinar to control when each step is going to happen.
Yeah, I think it'd be quite a short webinar if we went straight through the automation. So it helps tell the story. So right, this is coming from you, Ben.
Yeah.
And it's going to me. And so bing, off that goes. Now I've got a couple of profiles set on my screen. I've got my Ben profile, which is this here, Eskimo type icon. And then I've also got my own screen over here. So we're just waiting for that workflow to fire off. And when it does, we should get an email through. So let's just load my email. So I've just changed context here. Now this email's gone to both of us, one to me, one to Ben. Ben, if you can sign yours behind the scenes, that would be helpful.
Yep.
I just move us on a little bit. And what I will do is open this side. So naturally, we're using a demo license from Adobe, as you might expect, which is great for testing without using those credits up. And I can review and sign. Now, from an end user perspective, this is just the same as if you issued an Adobe Sign any other way. So you're not going to notice anything, the fact we're part of an automated process here. So we just give that a second to come through. We're going to get the pop-up on the left-hand side, just agreeing to the terms. As you can see, it's got the watermark of the demo. So we can zoom down to the document. And as you can see, that pre-population has come through nicely. We've got a date on it. And we can zoom through to the signature area. So I will sign it here, RS, and put a job title in. So let's put director. Perfect. It's got the date. I can submit it. And that's because you signed it at the same time, I think, Ben.
Yeah, sorry, I did that for you.
So there we go. Let's do that bit again. We'll just zoom to the bottom. There you go. You can see Ben signed it already. So I'll come back and do that again. And that will wrap it up. Now, just like a normal Adobe or DocuSign signature process, me as the third party will get a copy of that. And also like a normal Adobe or DocuSign process, this can go to people outside the organization. This doesn't have to be an internal, it's an internal process. It can go to anyone in the world. So, which is obviously useful in the scenario if you're working with a supplier. So Ben, now that's signed, what's going to happen next? I know if you haven't got automation in place, it sits in your inbox and then you rely on the employee to drag it into somewhere central, ideally into a filing structure you've already set up. Often that doesn't happen though.
Yeah, no, exactly. So that can often be forgotten. So Rupert, if you just refresh your screen, hopefully we should get an answer to your question pretty quickly.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, perfect. So again, the advantage of using Power Automate to orchestrate this signature process is that Power Automate is able to then grab the signed document from Adobe when it's finished and go and save it straight back into the library so that you don't need to worry about finding it yourself.
And let's have a quick scan of that document while we're here, Ben. And just
perfect.
If we scroll down to the
second
bottom,
to load,
which is there we go. Yeah,
good. So we can see the signature, perfect. That's
Job
done what it needs to do. It's all been digitally signed. And then maybe when you just come out of that document, Rupert, let's just go and scroll over to the right-hand side a second. So the other thing that we've done is, again, because we can do this in Power Automate, we have just updated the document set to say that the confidentiality agreement, otherwise known as an NDA, has been signed on that particular date. That can then be used for any further documentation that needs to be generated, any further contracts, for instance.
That was cool. I think there's a few other scenarios that we've just got on the deck there, which we can just run through. So, I mean, Ben,
yeah,
you speak to a lot of clients. Tell me where you see this kind of thing happening.
Yeah, no, fair enough, Rupert. So, yeah, I mean, there's quite a few use cases. So really, we're talking about where are e-signatures useful. So they can be useful in all sorts of places, and this is definitely not an exhaustive list. But if we take, HR, for instance, sending out employment contracts, that could be something that's done during the employee onboarding process or before they've technically joined. Looking at pay reviews, for instance, salary reviews. If you're looking in the project scenario, maybe you deliver projects for your clients, such as we do. So it could be things like managing change requests. It could be project sign-off forms for the client to say that they're happy the project's been completed. And then, of course, in sales, it will be sales contracts, or order forms, or other types of documents that we've already seen. So being able to use those e-signatures and bring that into SharePoint, is quite a powerful capability.
And I think the other thing is a lot of information, for example, for a project, you have that information already in SharePoint. You know what the project name is, you know what the project number is, you know what the client is. So generating those documents, you're not repeating and typing in the same information over and over again. So it makes it quick and also reduces the risk of error. So let's move on back to the demo. And Ben, I'm now in a place where I've got the contract from my supplier in my inbox. Where do I go from here? Because I want to get that signed off by my legal and my IT teams.
Marvelous. Yep. So as we said earlier on in this webinar, the next stage is that we want to take this contract through an approval process. So we've gone through the, supplier onboarding, we've done the NDA, et cetera, et cetera. Now we want to review this contract and we want to get it signed off before we sign it. So let's assume that that's gone through a process already. Rupert's got the contract and we're going to go and upload it into our SharePoint library here. And now what we're going to do is kick this off for an approval process. So Rupert, would you mind just selecting our link there, which is Approve EXP?
And look, this is sake of demos. We just put it in this folder. We could create folders and start building more of a structure to how we manage these contracts, because often there's more than one document involved. But for the sake of a demo, we're trying to just keep it a little bit clean here. Now, Ben, this doesn't look an awful lot like Power Automate. Are we still in Microsoft 365?
Yes, that's a really good point. So why are we not using Power Automate for this part of the demo when we're using it for most of the other places? And I think, ironically, if you will, some of the approval parts of Power Automate, they're very good to get you off the ground, but they do have some ongoing challenges. So what we have decided to do with this is implement our own mechanism to handle the approvals. And there's a couple of reasons why. So the first is, Power Automate flows will time out after 30 days. So if you think that your approval process could take longer than 30 days to complete, then you need to be quite careful if you're going to do that using a Power Automate approval process. So notice that the automates that we've done earlier in this demo are all things that are happening quite quickly, generating a document, sending for signature, etc., etc. But this particular one, an approval, is often one that can take quite a long time. So that 30-day issue can be a challenge. The next thing is with Power Automate approvals is that if you send them out to multiple people and you require everyone to be able to approve that document before it can move on, sometimes those documents can get stuck and it's not clear who it is that is holding up the process, because Power Automate doesn't easily give you that visibility below under the hood, if you will, as to who is waiting for that approval process to complete. So having a mechanism where you have more visibility of that is quite powerful, and that's something that we'll show shortly. And then I think the final thing, which is a little bit more of a maybe a nice to have, if you will, is that the mechanism for doing the approvals from Power Automate, it's either done in Microsoft Teams or it's done with an email. And whilst that is quite useful, sometimes it feels a bit disjointed to take people away from the SharePoint document library to do the actual approval. You want to be able to see all of that in context. So that's just a few reasons why we've decided to go with our own approach here to give something a little bit more powerful. So what we can see is we can see the document itself within the approval screen. And what we're going to do is kick off our contracts approval process. So why don't you hit that contracts approval? And I think Rupert's just zoomed in to show a couple of key points about the dates and the notice period, that the types of things that you would want to call attention to in a approval process. So what we can see on our interface here is there's a few steps that we're going to go through, and we're going to go through 2 role-based steps. So the first role is that we want to issue this to the IT team. So if you click IT first, please, Rupert. So they're going to validate this from a technical perspective and make sure that they're happy that this contract is going to do what it needs to do, the software is going to do what it needs to do. And as you can see, we can pick and choose. We've got the people in the approval chain, and we can choose how many of those need to approve. We'll just stick with 1 for the moment. And the next role that we want to approve is legal. So they're going to do that final sign off. 3 people in legal. Again, we only need 1 person to sign, but we have that option of choosing how many we want to sign the process.
And I can see that working really well in a committee scenario where maybe you need a majority and maybe there's 5 people and you need 3 to get it across the line. It doesn't matter which 3, you just need 3 people. So, and that ties back to your previous point about timeouts. A lot of organizations work with committees may only meet quarterly. So this will sit, for maybe 50 days before it gets to the approval process. So timing out is not going to help you. So yeah, let's get that going. Okay.
Perfect. Then the third stage is it's going to go and publish that document. Now, in this case, we're just going to go and save this into the library where it was originally issued. But you may have a scenario where you want to keep the signed versions of contracts slightly separate from the drafts. So it gives you a bit of flexibility to be able to choose where it's going to go. So let's just save that. That's kicked off our approval process. And one of the first things that can happen, I can see that I can hear it's come through in my already that you've been notified. So we've received an email to tell us about this approval process being started. So we've received that email. It's got some summary details, etc., and we can go in and review the document. It's just worth saying that there is a difference here. We're not using email to manage the approval process itself. We're not approving via email. We're simply using email for notifications, which is what which is far more appropriate. So as a user that is able to approve this document now, they can see the same interface that we saw before. They can see the document in line. They can go in through it. They can choose to approve it. So Rupert, why don't you approve that, for instance?
Yeah, I'm just going to see what I see around the screen here is this green? So I'm step 1 of a 3-step process. Approve, and complete. I've got a list here. I think I've got a notification here, and so I can see on the tooltip there. That's going to remind Amelia maybe to look at it if she needs to.
If there's someone that's waiting. Yeah, exactly. Let's have a look at that. So that's a really good point. So often with something like this, you may want to prompt a bit of collaboration. And what we're doing here is firing up a Teams chat around the context of that document. So this might just take a second to load. So we'll just let that wait a minute.
Yeah, Microsoft. We're using Teams in the web because we have I have multiple environments on my laptop. We have the one to do to work, and then the web version for when we do demos. So here we are. Right, Ben,
So
I've
what
got a
this has
message
done
here
is,
all teed up, ready to go. So I'm going to hit the go button there.
yep.
And yeah, go
So
on,
what
say
this has
again.
basically done is it's figured out who is in the approval chain, and it's brought all of those people into a new Microsoft chat that we can then use to discuss and raise any issues. It creates that thread that we can use to, discuss if there's any problems, what's the context, etc. So we can use the tools that Microsoft give us as appropriate. Instead of trying to build a whole approach to that, in a custom way, we can use the tools that are already there to handle that type of collaboration around the context of that document, but then we can go back to the approval system to do the actual approval itself.
Okay, so that was cool. I'm going to approve this here.
Good stuff.
And I think
So
the other approval. And then the other approval can be done by myself again. Obviously, this wouldn't happen in, shall we say, a real world, but it could be done by Chloe. It could be done by Rupert. And as I have Rupert set up here in my other screen, why don't we do that? So let's give me a second. Come to my inbox here, and let's click on that review document here. So we'll just give that a second to come to life. As you can see, I see step 1 is completed. We're now in step 2, and I've now changed context to me. So click on that tick box, and we're done. So I can close that. Or I should actually take it off the screen. Now, Ben, that gets our document approved. I get notified by email, etc. Is there a way I can get that overarching view if I'm in that procurement role of where my approvals are, or what things are open for approval and where they?
Yeah,
where that might sit?
exactly. So I think, again, part of the rationale around using a slightly more bespoke approach with the approvals is to give us a bit more visibility of information of what's going on. So Rupert, why don't you click into the approvals list link that we have set up? And what we'll see here is some visibility of all of the approvals that are being sent out from this system that you can then go and explore where they are in that process. So yeah, we can see we've done a few of these as we're preparing today, which is why there's 3 of them. But if you click into one of those, Rupert, we should be able to then see, where they are in the process. Yeah, so we can see what happened at the first stage. We can see that I approved the first stage. If we go on to the next stage, we'll be able to see who approved then.
And we've got that full audit trail.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
useful because then I can go back and see if things are stuck in the progress, who needs to be prompted. I think we saw that previous icon. So that was pretty cool. Ben, I've now got my contract approved. Someone's gone off now. They've worked with our supplier. We've signed it. We're not going to go through that process here because we've shown e-signatures. What more can I do now when I've talked about earlier about pulling that key information from that document and how we can use that information?
So yeah, as we've said, there's some fairly key information that's in our contract. We want to know when its renewal date is. We need to know if we need to give notice and what that notice period is. And ideally, we don't want to have to manually key that information out or try and extract it. So this is where we can start using some fairly simple AI to be able to detect that this document is a type of contract and read inside it to pull out that key information for us. So again, we've created a simple AI model, and we're going to use Power Automate to call into that. Again, this is something that would happen automatically, but we're just going to trigger it manually for the purpose of this webinar here. So the first thing we're going to do is classify the document. What this basically means is run a process to detect what type of document it is. Is it an NDA? Is it a contract? Is it another type of document? Because I only really want this process to apply to our contracts. So the first thing it's going to do is work out, is this a contract or not? and then we will see shortly, we're going to go and get that that information out. So this normally takes about 10 seconds. That's currently empty. Why don't we just refresh that and see if that's been populated?
And so you've done some work behind the scenes to show the AI model what does a contract look like, so it knows the kind of, should we say, fingerprint of what a contract looks like, even if they're all a little bit different, which we know contracts are.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So what we've done, this is using a machine learning approach, which is where you give the model some examples. You only need to give it 5 examples, although the more you can, the better. So you give it some examples, and then you go and categorize the different types of documents and say, this is a contract, this is an NDA, et cetera, et cetera. And then the model is able to learn from that, and we can then tie into it with Power Automate. So we can see Rupert's got that open. It's populated the document type. It is of type contract, and we can then, based on that, start getting some more information out of it. So we're now going to run our last workflow, which is to extract contract information.
And so if this wasn't for a demo, this could all happen sequentially without user input because we know what to do next. It's just the next step in the workflow.
That's right.
And so what we're saving here is that whole piece around somebody having to open the contract, look for the key information, type it into a system, and just making that happen automatically. So taking away, the boring work, should we say?
Yeah, exactly. So I think while we're just waiting for that, Rupert, could you just go up a level in the hierarchy of the structure there a minute? We go to our contracts route. So this is quite a common thing that we see is that when people, if you're in procurement or in legal and you're trying to get some high level visibility of all of your contracts, often they will be buried within subfolders, and you don't want to be drilling down into every single folder to find them. That can be quite frustrating. So because we've identified that that document is a contract, we're able to use that to create a view and see at a high level all of our contracts. So Rupert, would you mind just changing the view from all documents to contracts, please? And what we should see fairly shortly is that new document that's come through and it's been classified. So we can see our existing contracts are already there. We can see the new one, the health and safety training one. We can see it's been modified just a minute ago. And the point that we're highlighting is this view is looking inside all of my folder structures and pulling out all of the documents that are contracts so that I don't have to go and do that finding. It's started to populate some information for us. There's a few things that it's populated. The first is the confidence score. What does that mean? What we're basically saying is because this is AI, AI is never 100% confident that a document is of this type or that type, because it's all based on predictions, right? But that said, 85% is a pretty good confidence score. If you're getting 96, 97% confidences or above, then there's a possibility that your AI model isn't going to work with lots of different types of examples. It maybe is going to be a bit too specific and not deal with those edge cases. So having a reasonable confidence score is going to make it generalize a lot better. But the other thing that in particular we're interested in, it's been able to pull out those dates. So it's pulled out the start date, it's got the renewal date, and it's got the notice date. And in fact, we're just using a simple prompt there to highlight that that notice date is pretty close. We've used some color coding and an icon to prompt that. But Rupert, I think we might just worth reminding ourselves what was in the document itself before we pick
so
up
that
on this
feels
further.
about 7 weeks out from that renewal date. So
Yeah.
let's just pop open this document and see what was in the document. And we can zoom in a little bit as well when we get there. So 12-month term and 45 days notice. So yeah, about 7 weeks. So yeah, that's pretty smart. It's taken those 40. It's worked that out. We're not even in. It can't see 2025 anywhere, but it's clearly worked out from the contract that that's the the next anniversary. So we've gone from the 1st of June 24 to 1st of June 2025.
Yeah, so let's maybe just sort of open the bonnet on that a little bit very quickly. You'll see under the car bonnet or car hood, what we're talking about. So the point about this, what the AI has been able to do is pull out the numbers. It's pulled out the date. It's pulled out that number 12 for the 12-month term, and it's pulled out that number 45 for 45 days. Now, what we've done in our Power Automate is do some simple calculations to say, take the start date that it's found, add 12 months to it, and subtract 45 days from that. So we can then turn those sort of, numerical textual values into an actual date that we can then start using to generate reminders and prompts and those types of things, so people need to know what they do. So if we jump back to the document library again quickly and look at those figures, as you can see, it's figured out, it pulled out correctly the 1st of June, but then it calculated the renewal date as a year on from that based on 12 months. And then it's counted back 45 days to give us that notice date, which is in fact only a week away at the time of this particular recording.
And actually, Ben, you could be a bit smart about that notice date. When it passes, obviously the next notice date is going to be 17/04/2026. So
yeah,
bit of
and this
workflow there.
Exactly. This is an AI needed to do that. That's what you can do in the workflow. The only thing the AI has had to do is just pull those initial figures out so that we can then use them. One final thing that's just worth noting now is that now that we've got these dates and we can actually have real dates that we can start planning against, another powerful capability of SharePoint is to create views based on documents approaching a certain point in time. So if you just switch over to the view called Contracts Due for Renewal, perfect. So what we can see now is we've got that one document there, which has got that notice period due within the next 30 days. So effectively, when we've created this view, we've said, show me any documents whose notice period is gonna happen within the next 30 days. So if I'm in procurement, I can just look at this view as my sort of work list of items that I need to take a bit of a closer attention to.
Perfect.
But on top of that, you don't have to just be looking at this system all the time. We can create yet another Power Automate to help us with the automatic reminders. Now, this is something that Power Automate gives you, or SharePoint gives you, sort of out of the box. So, Rupert, if you click on the three dots at the top in the menu bar and go to Automate, we can set a reminder. And what this has basically done is look at any of our columns in SharePoint that are date columns and allow us to create our own Power Automate flow without knowing anything about Power Automate, to be honest, that says, when do I want to be notified? So how many days in advance of that date do I want to be notified? I might say 30 days because that would give me time to go back round and maybe use the approval mechanism to validate internally that we want to keep going as opposed to being notified. Now, we're not going to create that one because I've actually done one already. So what I'm going to do just very quickly is rerun that so we can see what happens.
Okay. And that's going to come through email, is that then?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that will come through email. Again, we're using email for notifications as opposed to our actual sort of approvals.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Perfect. So let's just go and bring that up. We can see that reminders come through. Ben, you asked to be reminded 30 days before the notice date for the following items or any items in our library. And yeah, it's shown us the document, which I can click on and see. And it's given me that date of when that's going to be due.
And there it is. Well, then I think that's a great way to wrap up the demo there. Let's just summarize quickly what we've seen there today.
Yeah, so let's just jump back a minute to this.
Okay, so we did the very beginning, we issued the NDA, and that was generated automatically based on data in SharePoint. And as Ben said, we could use other scenarios for that, HR, sales, project management, for example. We then used e-signatures, again, not coming out of SharePoint. So SharePoint doing all the automation behind the scenes and pulling back that final executed document back into SharePoint. And nicely also updating the execution date. So you've got that as a record. We then moved to the contract side. We went through a two-step approval process showing how we could ask for multiple people to sign that document off if we wanted to, or 2 out of 3 people. And then once it was approved, we moved on to how can we use AI or machine learning aspect of AI to pull data out of that document, particularly the inception date of a contract, the renewal date or anniversary, and the notice period. And then that final managed piece is, well, how can I create a quick view of everything which is coming up? So we looked at that view, which Ben pulled up there. And also, what would I like to do to terminating? And as based on the things that you've seen earlier, we could easily create a automated letter, which would be drafted saying, we wish to terminate the following contract with you on, which is due to expire on this date. So making those processes really simple. So yeah, that really brings us for a close. If any of that's interesting to you, you'd like a conversation about any of this, do jump on our website and you can click on the book a discovery call. That will drop something into my diary, as you can see the button there. And we'll have a chat. So Ben, thank you for putting that together. Really awesome. Some really smart stuff in there. Hopefully people find that inspiring.
Perfect. Thanks, Rupert.
Cheers, everybody. Bye now.
Cheers. Bye.